Hawaii's most difficult social and environmental problems. Your support helps us respond to the needs of our communities. It helps build a better and more just future for generations to come.
Thanks, G.
Beautiful.
Thanks again, Josh. And so I'm going to start off. I'm just going to read a statement, and then I have sort of a twofold question for you to begin with. So the Hawaii State Constitution makes clear that our natural and cultural resources, including our nearshore marine resources, are subject to the public trust and therefore must be managed and protected for the benefit of present and future generations. The Hawaii State Constitution further requires the state and its agencies to protect and enforce Native Hawaiian rights, including traditional and customary practices associated with and dependent upon carefully managed and abundant nearshore resources. As the complexity of environmental issues increase, the need for collaboration between and amongst departments like DLNR and its divisions such as DAR, DOBOR, DOCARE, and DOFA, and Hawaii citizens becomes increasingly critical to our collective effectiveness in caring for Hawaii. One significant position in navigating this will be the position of DLNR chair. One question we have is whether you have anyone in mind for this position.
Yes, thank you for starting with such an easy question. I appreciate it to no end. Look, I'm just grateful that I get to be with you, and I appreciate you. And by the way, that was a beautiful video to start us off, so thank you for that. I do. I want a conservationist who would lead DLNR. I don't have names picked yet for the cabinet specifically, although we are entertaining some early meetings, just because I don't want to be so presumptuous to think that we've won the election. We're working hard, and I hope and expect we will. But you will get a conservation-minded person from me, an environmentalist. I'll remind people, I don't know if they remember too much, but when I was in the Senate, and I don't harbor any ill will at all towards Mr. Ching, towards Carlton Ching, but when Governor Ige proposed him, and he really had more of a development bent, or so we felt, than the ultimate DLNR chair, which was Suzanne, I absolutely led the fight to make sure that we got someone who was going to be focused first and foremost on our shoreline, on our cultural practices, and on conservation. So that vote would have gone otherwise about 15-10 in favor. And I fought it back to 13-12 because I thought personally that as a senator, the governor had lost his way on that choice. So I want to frame things based on actual action from the past. Now, I have spoken to some very thoughtful people about the environment. We will see who ultimately comes. I would be remiss if I didn't at least share that some people like Jeff Michelina have been advisors to me on the environment. I don't know whether or not a person like he will actually choose to come in government. But I do think that people like him who focus on conservation and climate change need to be there. There have been other people that have historically, really stepped up, and I've even floated the name with some friends, and I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here, but people like Esther Kiaʻaina, for example, I'm very fond of her, and she's the kind of person I hope will come into my administration. But I will be very conservation minded, and I'll even be pursuing legislation that will be landmark. For instance, a climate impact fee. The reason I mentioned that, and we can unpack that later, is because that kind of process could decrease over tourism and at the same time provide lots of resources that we've often not had for any number of projects that would be necessary to protect the shoreline, to enhance all of our natural resources, to help us grow our sustainable energy program and so on. But I'm really being honest when I tell you that I have not put any name to paper for our actual directorships because I want them to go through a process. And the process is we'll have 3 groups of 10 advisors, each of which will have a third of the cabinet positions, and people will apply on the 9th of November if we've succeeded. And so if that happens, I'll have a few people that I think are shortlisted that are environmentalists, but that's how we'll approach it. And I hope that's enough information. I'm really reticent to even drop 2 names like that because I don't want to put pressure on them. But that's the kind of people that I'm looking toward. And that's a bear of an administration. That actual department is probably about 80% of the challenges that we face in the state. And so, I'm very aware. People have always told me that whoever you put in DLNR, they better have, a lot of energy and a thick skin because there's just so many things that they have to deal with.
Thanks, Josh. Building on what you said around the 80% of some of the issues you might have to tackle. An issue for us, we increasingly feel inhibits collaboration in the current way we manage our environment is the current structure of DLNR. Could you share any thoughts on the organization's structure and what we could do to improve the structure of DLNR to better care for Hawaii?
Yes. DLNR is somewhat fragmented. And though I do appreciate, what the legislature has been pursuing, I worry that they took some things that I really appreciated that were part of DLNR and land use and conservation, like our use of energy, and now put it over into DBED. So I'm aware of the need to, I would say, reformulate some of the departments. It's not just DLNR and energy and that competition that has gone on and how it's big segregated, but also there's things in health and human services that should be together and other things that should be apart and so on. So I do expect to spend some energy on streamlining DLNR. So it's really about the land, and that it's really about making sure that it knows its own heart when it comes and bumps up against some of the other challenges like housing and where we have to go with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and agriculture. I think that there's been occasionally some mission drift, and it's difficult because the DLNR folks often don't have enough resources. It's really challenging. And I worry about that. They never have enough monies for enforcement. We do intend to help them and be some more supportive because now we're going to have a new law enforcement entity that can, I hope, really support DLNR. I think that's important that we do that. But there's a lot of change that has to happen. I'm going to be focused on conserving land from DLNR and better fitting some of the processes that we have so that when we actually want to conserve large tracts of land, we do it. And when we actually want to build housing in areas that the land may have not been as, useful for us for conservation, that we make those swaps so they're more favorable for conservation overall. But that's a much larger conversation, and I don't want to give anyone concern or pause. I think that we can relieve some of the tension that exists. And that's why I'm going to have a DLNR director that also works very well, or DLNR chair that works very well with the ag director and works very well with the DHHL director.
Thanks, Josh. As mentioned in the beginning, Hāʻena Uluʻaumo was created by the networks we serve, and our founding network is Ealupu, which means move forward together. And members of Ealupu now have some questions for you, and we'll start with Uncle Mac Poepoe from Molokai.
Aloha, Josh.
Aloha.
Yeah, my question is kind of maybe not one question, kind of one story. I wanted to ask, because the communities around the state that is seeking CBSFA designation has to go through a process, through the Chapter 99 process. So during the process, we, Moʻomomi, where I belong, went through the process, and we got to the point where the rules were approved by the board, and waiting for the governor to sign. and he got stuck in his track at the governor's desk. And I believe that there was some legislator that stopped the process. So the question is, you know, I kind of wonder, is that legal? And the other question is, what would you do if something happened in your administration that is, you know, that might happen similar to that?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think there has to be a very clear understanding that there's separation of the executive branch and the legislative branch. And once something's gone through its administrative rules or through the process to, for instance, conserve land or to protect our shorelines or any of these different possibilities, no legislator, whether they're a chair or not, should be allowed to insinuate themselves in that process. They have their chance when they pass bills. That's what they do. And they honestly, they also have their chance. And I lived this experience because I was 4 years in the House and 10 years in the Senate, have their chance when in the Senate they confirm or don't confirm the chair of DLNR. But once those people are in place, I think it's the responsibility of the administration to pass and move these, you know, these, I guess, agreements. And you have to have a strong governor. And I will say this, I'm sure that I'm going to make some great decisions and some wrong decisions. There's no doubt. But I will make decisions to move us forward, and I'll be deliberate. I won't let someone else block long processes. Like you go through a 2-year process and then right at the end game, it gets torpedoed. I won't let that happen because I value action, actually. And I think one of the challenges we've had is spend a lot of time talking about things. The world continues to turn and we have more global warming, but we haven't taken action, or we have more seashore and shoreline erosion and we don't take action. And I worry that it's that inaction that costs us more than anything. So, you know me, I'm an ER doctor. So you give me about 60 seconds, I'll make a decision and I look at the data, and if I have to adjust it, I will, but I will make a decision. And I have a pretty good relationship with the legislature in general, but my feeling is if I'm chosen governor by a large percentage of the population, which is what we're hoping to see again, then it's for the people. It's not specifically for the legislature that I'm serving. I'm serving for our communities.
Thank you, Josh. Next, we'll hand the second question off to Uncle Damien Kenison.
Hey, aloha, Dr. Green. Mahalo for your time.
Hello, thank you, Uncle Damien.
My name is Damien Kenison. I live in Hoʻokena, South Kona, Hawaii Island. Many of our families here depend on the ocean for food as we continue to pass on fishing skills learned from our kopuna to our children. With the general consensus that coastal development is harmful to coral reefs, would you support a moratorium on building residences abutting the ocean or other large-scale construction projects that may be proposed for our pristine South Kona and Kau coastline?
Well, that's a great question. I lived in Kau for 4 years. And so, you know, in many ways, that was kind of my first adult home. So thank you for, you know, bringing back that memory. I'm reluctant to see total moratoriums, but I also don't think we should do significant developments on the shoreline. I think we should set back because I don't think we have an adequate grasp of how to, based on waste and use, protect the coral and protect the environment. So large setbacks make a lot more sense to me. And that's how I would proceed. I actually think large setbacks with conservation spaces, even sometimes seeding some of the open spaces with much better managed land, like we're talking about marshes or supporting, it's basically supporting restorative technologies, which are natural restorative technologies, whether it's fish ponds or marshes or any of that, that's the right way to go. And so it's a difficult thing to say that we do an absolute moratorium, but I would be more than happy to really change the way we do development so that as we build houses, especially, we pull way back. And frankly, we'll be doing everyone a favor because there's going to be global warming and sea level rise, and people have to be pretty stupid to build right on the shoreline right now if they don't expect to lose their properties. So that's my general approach. But I do think that there should be conservation of large regions that are not just historical, but are culturally critical. And so we're talking about like Miloliʻi is a classic example. No one should be messing around with the cultural, the best cultural places that we have. I just want to be a little bit careful because we have such a housing crisis to say that there's a direct moratorium on building. But I know your question is right on the shoreline, and that's where I try to avoid.
Thank you, Josh.
Mahalo.
And speaking of Miloliʻi, our next question from Uʻi.
Aloha, Lieutenant Governor. Mahalo for being here. I'm Uʻilani Naipo. I'm a lineal descendant of Miloliʻi, South Kona, Hawaii Island. And the question I have for you speaks to a personal experience for my community of Miloliʻi. On August 2nd, the governor came to Miloliʻi to promulgate the rules that would be for our Miloliʻi CBSFA. Now, since 1994, when language was given an authority to DLNR to designate CBSFAs, today we only have two. We only have two. So for nearly 3 decades now, communities like mine, like Moʻomomi, like Hāʻena, like Kipahulu, have worked with government agencies to come up with collaborative solutions to natural resource management that are consistent with Native Hawaiian practices. Our customary and traditional subsistence practices are recognized in our Constitution. We have the ike that is crucial for protecting and caring for our land and waters, and progress should not take nearly 30 years. As governor, how will your office support and expedite ongoing efforts for community-based natural resource management? How will you remove the barriers for that progress? And how will your office encourage other communities to pursue place-based collaborative approaches to natural resource management?
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. So yes, for the community-based subsistence fishing areas, I mean, it's a little bit astonishing that one area got approved in '94 and they just signed the rules. I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. That's a government failure. So the way I would approach it is to actually have Native Hawaiian leadership in my cabinet, for one thing. I think you're pretty aware that that's a commitment for me. My wife's family's from the Big Island, and needless to say, they're fully integrated into the culture. I just think that I do things quicker than most people. I don't hesitate. My general approach is if someone's got a good idea, try it out, get moving. It's in the, it's, as you said, this is well established in our law and in the Constitution. So let's just do it. And frankly, the spirit of transforming tourism, which is becoming a bit of a dirty word because it's overwhelming us, is to actually have cultural stewardship of tourism. And so I think it's a great move actually to actually get the CBFSAs going. It's good for people. I mean, people are going to value Hawaii more because it's maintained and protected. So I can't see any reason a guy like me wouldn't just immediately embrace and sign off on rules. I don't even like anything being stuck on my desk for more than a day, to tell you the truth. So, I move on things a lot more quickly. I want to be very candid with you. Because I came to Hawaii to be a doctor, mind you, but not a politician, but I don't have a long-standing dynamic with any of these other guys that take forever, that don't promulgate rules, that fight against certain things. I'm very, very in favor of our Hawaiian culture, and I don't feel like it's my place to be an interloper. So yes, I have strong opinions about healthcare for everyone. No, I'm not going to get in the way when someone says they want to conserve land or a fishing area or anything that's culturally valuable in Hawaii. I will get an earful from Jamie if I do, I'm sure, or my cousin Moana or any number of people, but expect us to have, I don't know if the DLNR director will be Hawaiian. I'm positive that several Hawaiian leaders will be in my cabinet, probably anything ranging from, well, it could be DLNR, we could have an attorney general. We certainly are going to have lots of leadership in DHHL and everything that deals with land. And I'm going to be quite aggressive on a lot of those issues too. I know that we're talking more about conservation today, but I'm going to be very focused on reconciling our Hawaiian homeland question for, right now it's not that different. We've been talking about that since 1920, right? And not really being fair to people. And it makes me think that there's been this kind of, double standard against the Hawaiian people for a very long time. So I'm game to move forward. I think I won't be the limiting reagent on approving things. It'll actually be more the process just to make sure that the different communities themselves go through and decide what to establish next.
Mahalo nui for that. And now I'm going to pass it off to Jenny.
Mahalo Uʻi. Aloha, Dr. Green. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Thank you for being here. My name is Jenny Yagodich, and I grew up and still live here in Pupukea on the North Shore of Oahu, where I actively work in ocean conservation, education, and stewardship. And you touched on this a little bit a minute ago, but here's the question. DLNR's Division of Aquatic Resources, Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and Division of Boating and Recreation create the rules that help protect our natural resources. The Division of Conservation and Resources Enforcement, or DOCARE, is tasked with enforcing those rules. However, DOCARE is underfunded, understaffed, and not fully equipped to uphold its natural resource enforcement responsibilities. Many of us who work in resource management, especially management of our marine resources across Hawaii, see firsthand how limited DOCARE response, presence, and enforcement due to too little funding and too few positions results in a lack of trust, a lack of morale, and most importantly, a decrease in the health and abundance of our natural resources. How will you, as governor, ensure that DOCARE has the adequate funding it needs so that they can effectively and proactively respond to and enforce the rules and regulations in place that protect our natural and cultural resources?
Yes, thank you. Another excellent question. So my experiences as the Senator of Kona and what also went further south was that every day. I mean, we never had any law enforcement or DOCARE enforcement available just because they were not available. They just didn't fill positions, or they were so spread thin that impossible. And I know that that's the case in the North Shore and everywhere. So two things. One, again, I'll go back to where I began, which is a fully committed resource, in this case, a green impact fee or a climate impact fee, call it what you will. I suspect they're going to call it a green fee just because they're going to mess with me after I become governor, which is fine. I don't mind if that's what we have to do to protect the environment. But a $50 fee of any traveler that comes to the state of Hawaii, which will decrease utilization by those who don't know how to shepherd our environment, and at the same time generate over $350 million a year that can be used for resource management, protection, and governance. And I think that that's super important as we continue to see so many people in Hawaii and also really serious climate impact. So that's where I'm starting. Also, there is going to be this additional law enforcement entity that will be helpful in the state of Hawaii, which the next governor is tasked with creating. It's going to be a kind of a combination of sheriffs and police that will deal with what the priorities of the governor are. And that should be conservation and protection of our natural resources, in addition, of course, to protection of our people. So that's a really important entity that's getting formed. It's kind of like a state police, but it's meant to be tasked also to deal with the things that you just mentioned, protection of our treasured and pristine environment. And so that's how we start. It will be funded by the legislature, which is a good thing. Usually we create things that may not be fully funded at first, but it appears that it's going to be. And so I'm fairly optimistic about this. But I do continue to come back to this green fee because having a dedicated resource that DLNR has not necessarily had, at least not had enough. I think I've heard people say we're as low as 2% of the needed funding for the department at times. It just made me feel badly that Suzanne Case was trying, and the people that came before her were trying to actually do a decent job on some of these mandates and not having really people to go and shepherd the environment.
Mahalo, thank you for that. I'm going to pass it over to Billy for the last question.
sorry, call my, well, Dr. Green. My name is Billy, from the island of Hawaii. Recent graduate in planning at UH Manoa. Currently, I'm a director with the Hui Maka'aina na Umakana in Hāʻena on Hawaii. And as a nonprofit dedicated to what was left to us by our puna, right? Particularly the kuleana to restore and care for and protect the natural and cultural resources of Hāʻena. We've seen the sort of damage that tourism does to our communities and our natural resources. In Hāʻena, our hui has really sort of grown into the fullest extent of that kuleana through full management of our ancestral lands, of our fisheries, and now we've assumed management roles of the reservation, parking, and shuttle system in Hāʻena. So with partnerships throughout Hāʻena, different organizations, we offer Hawaii really one of, if not the premier models of regenerative tourism. And we have found ways to curb unvetted tourism, congestion woes, traffic, human impacts. So we understand tourism's outsized importance to the economy, right? But how exactly will your administration change how tourism is managed, right? Help us kind of understand this destination management approach to tourism, and how will you balance catering to the needs of visitors while being mindful of community and the stresses to the natural environment.
Yes, thank you. Another great question. I appreciate every one of them. So thank you, Mahalo Billy. So a couple things. First of all, I think the die is cast that HTA has been finally alerted that they have to change their management model. Too many people, too fast, too based simply on luxury tourism was really not where Hawaii wanted to go any longer as a state. We learned that lesson once we had no tourism, because we realized how happy people were in a certain way that we didn't have 10 million people overrunning us for a year. So it's a hard way to learn the lesson, but we learned it nonetheless. So I think that there's going to definitely be cultural management of tourism, and the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement is certainly right in the mix right now, and that's being resolved by DBED and Director McCartney. I expect that will actually get resolved before I become governor. Knock wood that does happen. But I'm completely open to that partnership. I think that has got to be a part of what we do for tourism. Now, I think that beyond that, though, a lot of times money matters, and if we don't have resources to do these things, we have a problem. We just don't get there. We put a mandate out, we don't follow the rules. We put a mandate out, we don't have oversight or enforcement, like we were describing in the previous conversations. And that's why I really tried to think in the 2 years as I was preparing to run for governor, what would actually make a difference. And so we studied different models like Palau, and what Palau did to decrease inappropriate tourism, or tourism that was no longer based on culture. And that's where we came up with the idea for impact fees, and really therefore the monies to fund what you're doing probably at this, I don't know when you refer to Hāʻena, if you're talking about the CBSFA or you're talking about just better management in general, but I think you're probably talking about both things. And that is the reason that I keep proposing this, and why I think it's the right model to bring resources in while decreasing the number of people, and therefore funding the many things. And I'm sure they will be culturally appropriate as we manage all of our open spaces, our conservation lands, our cultural treasures. So that's how I'm planning to do it. And that also is the way you get to fund the positions once and for all that are empty too often in DLNR. So I would do that. But we're in deep partnership now, I think. And I don't want to describe it as with the Hawaiian people, it's in Hawaii. We're in deep partnership together, and that will include really focusing on what's special about Hawaii. And Jamie and I often talk about not co-opting the culture just for profits. And I think that's why it's good. It's really good to restore kind of the sense of Hawaii, rather than, and don't get me wrong, I like hotels, but rather than just focusing on very high-end hotels as the attraction to Hawaii, I think it should actually be focusing on the extraordinary nature of Hawaii and, you know, the cultural uniqueness of the people here. So that, I think, is what's going to happen. That's what will transform Hawaii in a way that makes it better and separate from Mexico, better and separate from other destinations, and actually give us something to celebrate here for our people. So it's part of the renaissance, I believe, of the Hawaiian community. And so I'm glad you mentioned language. I'm glad it was mentioned earlier that we talk about, you know, really preserving what we've got. That's how I'm focusing on it. Now, truth be told, the most important person will probably be my DLNR director. And I would expect those who are more focused on Hawaiian culture, who are advising me, an advisory council, which I will always have. Those are the individuals that I think are going to guide me. And that's where you guys should make sure that you're coming in and make sure you're guiding me appropriately on these issues. Like I said earlier, I'm pretty good on health issues and public safety issues, human services issues. I'm a quick study on a lot of other things, but I think that it's impossible to expect any individual to completely understand a culture that they're not from. And so that's why I'll take my cues from other leaders.
Mahalo, Dr. Green. Kevin?
Thanks, Billy. Well, Josh, it's 3:35. You got through the questions pretty quickly. So we have some other questions that have been built into the chat. I think one of the first questions I would like to ask, and it's come up in the past because the focus of our networks is on community-based natural resource management. And so it's a simple but complex question, and that is, who is the community to you?
The community for me is people that live and struggle to survive day by day. That's the lesson I learned when I came to Hawaii to be the doctor in Nālehu, which was an extraordinary experience, because when you plunk a guy into a community from far away and ask him or her to care for that community, in my case, it was 8,000 individuals that were almost entirely Hawaiian or Filipino, honestly. I developed a very strong sense of community. People took me into their lives, which was extraordinary. And that's actually what's prepared me to be your lieutenant governor and then governor. I really had a strong sense of community all along. I continued to be a family physician and then a doctor in the ER. And so I've stayed very close to people. And I usually use that approach, like when we had the pandemic. You know, I really spoke to community rather than in a way that was corporate or was speaking to the directors in the departments. I really spoke to people. I hope that people felt that way as I was trying to be the state's communicator on that crisis. So I'm very community oriented. I was trained as a family physician, which is a community and family physician, frankly. So it's local people. I am mindful of the impact of others, but they are not centrally a part of our community. They are visitors.
Thanks, Josh. This next question was sort of asked, but I think it's be nice to bring it out given its contemporary relevance. The community of Kipahulu, Maui has been working towards a community-based subsistence fishing area for the past 10 years, together with DLNR and other partners. If the proposed CBSFA is approved by the DLNR soon, the CBSFA would land on the governor's desk for signature early in 2023. Are you in support of such designations? If not, and if you're unfamiliar with it, how can we provide more information to your administration on matters like community-based subsistence fishing areas?
Well, I did some reading, and I've been pretty attentive over the years to my communities when I was a state rep and senator. So I always felt that when DLNR came in, people were not necessarily happy because it felt like the Oahu-centric government was coming to the neighbor islands where I was the representative. So that I remember those conversations quite often were contentious. My general approach would be simply to sign it because you went through the process with the community. I can't imagine being swayed after the fact. So if you go through the process of community-based subsistence management, I'm pretty happy about that. honestly. I think it benefits everybody, frankly. I'm sure that there must be some push and pull on, in these debates, but it seems like it's in our interest to, provide subsistence conservation. And it also is very, very culturally in tune with where we should be. It harkens back to what were our values forever, that's my understanding. And I hear lots of stories from, my extended family now. So I would sign it, although it would be great to have briefings as we go, especially during the process where I could be more helpful. It's kind of my job as a governor or lieutenant governor to administer what's decided on the ground. It's not really, except under rare circumstances, the responsibility of the governor's office to, from a top-down capacity, make those decisions. We're supposed to administer the decisions of the people and do it well and do it efficiently and to do it in an expedited way, not this 20 or 30-year process sometimes. So you're going to find that I like to move on things, like I said earlier. And if you've gone through the process and got it all, the communities come together, that's not a difficult decision for me to sign.
Thank you, Josh. Here's a kind of indirect question, I think, at natural resource management. A lot of the discussion in our networks often comes down to resources, but it also comes down to uplifting a new generation of stewards and building a community in which they can stay home and afford to live here. And so the question really is, what does the future of affordable housing look like for you in housing our people, which is, I think, relevant to the question on community as well? Absolutely.
So it is absolutely my top priority as your next governor to build housing for our local families. It's our top probably 1, 2, and 3 priorities in many ways, because until we have enough housing, we can't keep our kids here. I got a 15-year-old and 11-year-old, right? Until we have housing, we can't have enough nurses. So it's a health question. Until we have enough housing, we can't have public school teachers. I went to public school. So housing is pretty much everything. The first thing that we have, the greatest opportunity we have right out of the gate is the $600 million of Department of Hawaiian Homelands funding, plus $175 million of capital improvement resources they have. And I intend to be very close to the homesteads on this matter to make sure that we're actually putting people into houses of their choices, properties, and whether it's ag housing or specifically community houses. I intend to make that our top priority. And it's one place where we can be somewhat discriminating about how we do things, because we can push through quickly permits and programs. So that's a big deal for me. That $775 million is a huge opportunity that can't be squandered. At the same time, I intend to cut the red tape very significantly, especially along some of the large projects. We talk about transient-oriented development, but housing along the rail, the rails become a bit of a dirty word because they messed it up so badly. But putting housing in areas where we can quickly build housing is going to be something I focus on. We already have an internal plan to build 10,000 houses in our first 4 years quickly, with some expedited singular projects and permits where we have large investors that will come and build housing to really increase the inventory in a huge way. That's a big piece of it. And then finally, cracking down on illegal Airbnbs is important, because there's over 40,000 of them. And those are units that are being consumed, which should be in the rental pool. And so that's mainland guys doing illegal Airbnbs, which really takes houses away from our local families. So that's just 3 of the things I intend to do. There's a lot more there, but that's my approach. And if we do a very good job on housing, and particularly Hawaiian homelands, I think actually it will restore a lot of faith in government from the Hawaiian community, but also from people who just feel they're local and they want to be cared for. They want to have a shot. I look at affordable housing not at this $1 million price point, but closer to $400,000. I think that the new generation would prefer to more quickly get into a smaller house with opportunities for the future rather than waiting for decades. I will tempt fate here and refer to the situation which was discussed a bit. My wife's mother died while she was eligible to get onto the Hawaiian homelands rolls, and she was like 42, 43 years old. So this happens so often to our local families that it's just not acceptable. We've got 203,000 acres in Hawaiian homelands. We should disposition them right away. And I think that is the kind of respect and trust that's owed to our people locally. But it's going to be a lot. You know, the good thing about my candidacy, if I can be blunt, is I've got allies everywhere, from people who build houses to land use people to, you know, these carpenter folks who've been very helpful to build housing all across the spectrum, and even bankers. Okay, so those guys, they know that I'm talking seriously about making it affordable, bringing down rates, giving people opportunities to get into first homes. We intend to put a strong-willed person in the DHHL space, to be determined.
Thanks, Josh. The folks in our networks are also interested in, when we talk about conservation, we're also talking about that which feeds us. And so we're also talking about systems that are abundant and generate ability to feed our own communities. So one of the questions is, if you're elected governor, what actions would you take to support aquaculture restoration and development?
I like that question, because the pure tonnage of protein that can be produced and food is actually much higher in the ocean than it is on land. Not that I don't really favor growing our own vegetables and growing produce, and probably moving away to a degree from a heavy beef and cattle industry that sometimes takes a lot of land. Okay, but I would be supportive of each industry. But fish is a great part of the future. And, you know, I don't eat as much fish as I should. You could probably see that in me based on my level of fitness. But there is an incredible opportunity, not just deep in the ocean, but we've been talking on my team about both old and new technology. And so, yes, aquaculture is going to be key to us, but also restoring fish ponds, restoring that opportunity for our people here in Hawaii seems very sensible to me. So there'll be a mix of new technology and new ag, which is going to be fairly water conservation driven, because we have a water challenge now. I think we shouldn't shy away from that reality, but also growing fish in the ocean is a good idea. There are good ways to do it, and there are less good ways. We have to be a little bit careful of some of the pesticides and the chemicals and hormones that we use on fish. I'm aware of that. I've watched with interest what they did in North Kona. It's a fascinating thing to see. But a lot of the tradition, it's my understanding that a lot of the traditional approaches to fishing can produce just a gigantic amount of food for people in Hawaii. And so I'm going to be very deferential to people in that expert space. This is why I was a little worried when DLNR came and curtailed catches, and sometimes like captured in conservation areas. They're trying to curtail like catching aquarium fish, but also it ended up drawing in traditional fishing and subsistence fishing and just plain, you know, just fishermen. So I'll be very thoughtful about that, having watched it.
Thank you, Josh. And speaking of water, I'll have a sip of our special Hawaiian water.
Okay.
The next question is, can you please tell us what your position is on shutting down the Red Hill fuel tanks sooner than the projected 4 years from now? What actions would you take on this issue if elected governor?
Thank you. Yeah, the Red Hill has to be shut down completely. I met with the senior leadership of the military on several occasions now, and you saw that they announced that they now shrunk it, they believe, to 1.5 years. So I'm putting pressure on them to do that. I've also told the military that their future approvals and leases on any number of our pieces of land is contingent to a degree on how well they shepherd this project. So they've damaged the public trust without a doubt. Spilling fuel into our water supply and water table, as a physician, I could tell you, is very dangerous from a cancer standpoint, and also from all the mucous membranes that we have from the throat to the chest into the abdomen get threatened by hydrocarbons, which is what's going on. So as a doctor, I'm very concerned. So I've told them they have to speed up the recovery. They're doing it in parallel now. So they're going to be able to get get a system in place where they can, through one fully restored and constructed line safely, they can start doing it while they repair the other lines. I also have begun conversations about what they should do with Red Hill in the future, and it should not be for fuel. I think it probably should be for high-tech research, which is actually a unique opportunity for us, but it's totally clean. It doesn't involve the water or fuel or anything of the sort. So we could restore that asset and make it somewhat useful. So I'm going to be pushing them very hard. I'm pretty willful, and you know, as a senator, I was pushing them, but I didn't have all the authority to really stop the military. Now, with a strong director of health, with a DLNR director, and also just kind of with an absolute direction to them that they have to not only restore our water supply, but also build housing for us if they want their leases, I think you're going to see a lot better partnership with the military. Someone has to just be firmer with them, and I've already started it.
Thank you, Josh. And speaking of water, you know, the year of the Limu, the declaration of this year as the year of the Limu has brought attention to the significance of water and the safe and healthy flow of water to our shorelines so that Limu can be abundant again. And that has to do with this question is, what actions would your administration take to protect watersheds, Mauka to Makai, and ensure fresh water supply for our people and our ecosystems?
Yes. So one necessary thing to do is to actually maintain land conservation so that you have the proper plants. Native plants have to be sustained in order to detoxify a lot of what our development has actually yielded. That's pretty important, actually. And so in some areas where we've overbuilt, unfortunately, we haven't provided, you know, natural and important conservation techniques to help. A big problem, of course, is that where we have large concentrations of people, there's a lot of refuse. And so we're unable to clean the water, and we're unable to really restore clean water without bacteria, which is a problem for us. That's why there's going to be a really large movement to move away from cesspools and to really better shepherd our water table. That's going to require a lot of funding, actually, and a lot of sustained kind of investment, because everyone is going to have to better, if they're living in an ahupua'a, is going to have to better sustain the waste that they have, especially when there's concentrations of people. So there is good technology coming. I think we're going to provide tax credits for people to do that. It's actually going to be a pretty good industry. So that's a big piece of it. At the end of the day, I will tell you this. I'm not sure that anyone has been more stern with the polluters, whether that's Monsanto or other chemical companies that have put some of our people at risk. And I've been pretty firm with them. I think that is really not the industry that should be in Hawaii, where we have a contained ecosystem and just a finite amount of clean water. So I've asked them to move on, honestly, or move into different industries so that we can have conservation and use clean water. The other things that, because water is finite, I think we should take advantage of whatever technologies there are to grow and do important ag, you know, in a way where we can collect and protect a lot of our water. And there are a lot of new technologies that are helping. There's advanced greenhouses that require subsidy for the Department of Ag. It requires support from DLNR, and I'm very well informed about that now after studying and talking to people. So this is just some of the things I plan to do. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Let's see, it's 3:53. I have one more question I've identified that I think is significant. The folks on this call and the folks in our networks not only take care of the watersheds in the nearshore environment, restore fish ponds, care for limu beds, but they also care for the iwi, for the bones of their ancestors, and for the sacred places of the landscapes which they live. And the last question I have for you is, what are some of your solutions to the issues impacting historic preservation in Hawaii?
Thank you. So from a historic preservation standpoint, and we saw this as a big problem, for instance, in Hokulea down in South Kona, where they just didn't tend to the historical processes appropriately. They only had one or two members from DLNR there at any given time. And so they were constantly finding the EV, and it was just not good at all. It was not good for the morale of our people. So I think you actually have to fund these positions, and you have to really be much more proactive whenever you're going to grow or build at all. The challenge, of course, is that we have a pretty, steep uphill climb to make sure we have enough houses for our people. The way we solve that is not to build in places that are controversial or have as much historical significance, places that are already been vetted. That's why doing it in the urban core is a little bit safer, and building housing in that space and leaving our more rural areas comparatively untouched. And I think by doing urban infill, that's the way to go. We even have some centers of population away from Oahu that I think are safer and easier to build in, rather than going deeper into ancestral lands where you're bound to probably tread on people's cultural heritage. So at the end of the day, we have to find enough resources for the positions too, because there are going to be times where people want to restore their home or build a second home where their family has lived for generations. But those are the very individuals that are most likely to protect and preserve our culture. So I'm not too worried about that kind of building. I'm much more worried about larger development. And I will always be mindful of our needs to just respect culture and history. Because if we don't do that, we're not special. We're not unique in Hawaii. And I think that probably more than anything, aside perhaps of just preserving our climate for our children going forward, people really want to maintain that special cultural heritage that the Hawaiian people bring. It is unique in ways that, as a person who's married into the culture, one should love and respect. And so you'll see a lot more conservation from me. You'll have to check me as we go, because there's a lot of pressure to build housing for our kids. But I think that if we do it intelligently, we can succeed in kind of the urban areas.
Thanks, Josh. It's about 4, but as you were talking, a bunch of questions jumped up again. Are you willing to answer, or you need to run off to go sign waving?
No, I'm good. I got another 10 or 15 minutes in me, if that would help.
Okay. I'll ask this one. If you're elected governor, would you support resilience hubs in small rural coastal communities?
Yes, I like that. That harkens to centers of excellence, where you can, in a more concentrated way, make great improvements. And that's the way we do it in healthcare. And I think that's a very good idea for preservation of the environment.
Okay, thank you. This next question is, would you consider receiving advice from groups providing stewardship of lands for the appointment of a DLNR chair?
Absolutely. People should call me on my cell phone, which is 937-0991. Text me, call me, anything. And it's important that people reach out to me. I mean, that's very valued for me. And I definitely am, I'm already beginning to form a team, many of whom these people I've mentioned to you before. And so I've got a lot of very good, not just good cultural practitioners that have been advising me, but also a lot of good environmentalists. So, I've tended to have that leaning as a person going way back.
And I think this would be our last one, actually. And you sort of answered it, but I think it's coming from a different angle. On a community-based natural resource management issue, if a community is not able to unite completely, and when a noisy majority working with corporate and other interests perhaps opposes the visionary efforts of a minority, how would you deal with that kind of situation?
Yes, well, I think we've experienced that to a degree. I assume that is at least referencing Mauna Kea and the TMT. And so my general approach is to be a great, respectful mediator and to let people say their piece and work towards some kind of harmony. It can be done. I'm super active with people. I'm not trying to ever ram my ideologies down people's throats. I'm very careful not to ever do that. Even on healthcare matters, if someone tells me they don't feel strongly about doing something that I've recommended, I accept that. The challenge here, if I may, and I don't want to, go too far astray of what this person's question is. The challenge here is that if we're not respectful, thank you, it's 808, of course, by the way. If we're not respectful of our culture and traditions, even a minority or a smaller number of people do have to be respected, because it has a long-lasting effect on our history going forward. And some of the gains that have been made culturally by the Hawaiian people are somewhat tenuous. We have seen generations of people not get land. We've seen generations of people leave. And when we've seen the successes we've had about the Hawaiian Renaissance, I don't think that should be undermined. So I will be, like I said, a great mediator of people's differences of opinion. But overall, I'm a believer that if you make accomplishments known through actually delivering results, people, as long as they're listened to respectfully, tend to really work together in Hawaii. I've seen that much more than the opposite. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when our administration does a good job on protecting the shoreline, and when our administration does a good job on Hawaiian homelands. I think actually you might see a lot more agreement on some of the large projects. I don't know that means the TMT and the on Mauna Kea will be resolved psychologically or from a planning standpoint, but at least people will feel that we're all in this together. And irrespective of corporate interest or ethnicity, we are all in this together here in Hawaii, because there's no one else coming to our aid. So we're navigating our culture and our families and our ethnicity here in this small place together. So you'll find me to be a very healing governor, I think, on some of these matters, and also very hands-on.
Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. And we wish you luck in the campaign ahead.
Thank you.
And mahalo nui.
Mahalo very much. I really appreciate the time.
Aloha.
Aloha.